Good evening, everyone. Great to be back. Thank you to those who are joining and those who will join. Maybe you're watching a replay, a repeat of this live stream, but I'm here to give some practical feedback on student work. So if you've written any essays, if you've written any short stories, persuasive arguments, and you've submitted them for feedback, and you can do so, by the way, by using the link below these live stream videos on YouTube. There is a link there. You can use the form to submit your work and get what I think is very detailed, comprehensive feedback to help you improve. So great to see everyone here. We've got WP in the comments. Welcome, my friend. Thanks for joining. I'll soon be pulling up a student example, and I just want to talk through a couple of things that I think will really help all of you with your essay writing. I'm going to point out a few easy tweaks that you can all make to actually improve. WP says, can I just study less for Module C? Well, you can study less. Actually, the answer is yes. You can study less if you study the smart way, right? If you do things the right way, you can actually do less. If you're focusing your attention on the wrong things, then you're going to have to study more. So it's all about efficiency. If you want to study the smart way for Module C, you need to know what the 80-20 rules are. Like what is the 20% activity that's going to give you 80% of the results? And it might be preparing a core draft for, say, an imaginative or a discursive. If you just prepare one thing, if you just prepare a discursive or an imaginative and you make it the equivalent of a 20-mark response, then you've already prepared yourself for a few scenarios. You could be asked to do a 10-mark response, but by doing the 20-mark draft in your preparation, you can just know in advance the parts that you would cut out and the shortened version of that longer form. So you create one long form draft for a Module C response, say it's an imaginative, discursive, or persuasive, choose your preference. And from there, you're already prepared for different lengths, different mark allocations. So prepare a 20-mark core draft response for an imaginative, discursive, or persuasive. Let's say you did imaginative. And then think about how you can also create different versions of that draft for the discursive and persuasive, or the other two forms. So you start with one core draft, try and recycle the ideas and the stylistic features as much as possible across the other two. If you're doing a discursive piece, it's actually quite easy to change a discursive into a persuasive, because really you're just upping the modality. You're going from exploring something in a more neutral fashion, or at least in a more contemplative kind of manner, to actually arguing a specific perspective. But in both cases, you're not really constructing a story or having a plot. You could have anecdotes in a discursive and you can have an anecdote in a persuasive. But in the persuasive, you are trying to convince the reader of one specific point of view, and you make that obvious. Your language is much more certain. Whereas in a discursive, the language is much more like, perhaps this, and then you go on a tangent and you reflect on something else. It's like this more free-flowing reflection on an issue versus you trying to prove a point. So you can still be exploring the exact same thing, but the style and the tone changes, right? So discursive to persuasive, you don't need to construct an entirely different draft for those two. The imaginative is going to be a little bit different because it has to have a plot element. You have to build that characterization, but you can at least use a lot of what you would have in the discursive or persuasive insofar as the anecdote is concerned. So it's always good to, in any piece, have a short story component, whether it's a flashback or otherwise, that you can almost use in all three scenarios. But effectively, if you wanted to really be safe, I'd probably have a core discursive and then practice making that a persuasive, although it would be very similar overall. And then you can also have a separate imaginative piece that has the same concerns. It's talking about the same thing, but it's going to obviously have more plot in it. So 2 core drafts would really be all you need, but 1 core draft to start with, and then use the same concerns and as many of the same stylistic elements as possible in all 3 versions. So that's how you can study less for Module C. And you can just have the 1 core reflection, practice adapting it to all 3 draft possibilities in terms of imaginative, discursive, and persuasive. But 1 core draft composition, maybe 2, because you've got to be prepared for the imaginative, but also the discursive / persuasive. We're going to group those 2 together. If I was preparing it, it would be a very similar piece, but I would understand those tonal shifts. And then I would have the 1 core reflection, but I would know the different kind of purpose that I might have. Well, I'm going to have the same purpose for all of them, really, but I would know some of the tweaks that I'm going to make and the different quotes from my own piece that I would need to include for the different composition possibilities in my reflection. Okay, I need to memorize my essay before Friday. How can I fully remember my essay quickly? I have bad memory. Okay, well, if you have bad memory, it's obviously going to be harder to do the normal approach, but it doesn't mean you can't learn your essay. I would say don't stress as much about learning it word for word, especially if you don't have good memory. What you want to really memorize is a core kind of trigger word for each sentence. Okay, what's one word per sentence that is quite unique to that sentence, that kind of captures the essence of that sentence? And if you can just memorize that, that can actually trigger your memory of the rest of the sentence. So instead of trying to remember every sentence word for word, if you have bad memory, try and remember a core word, one term, maybe it's a phrase per sentence, and really commit to memorizing them in order. And then practice jogging your memory whenever you remember that word. So you memorize the one word or term, and then hopefully that brings back memory of more of the sentence. The other thing, of course, that you need to memorize is your quote or quotes. So you've got to memorize the quotes because they have to be exactly the same. Otherwise, I would just remember the one key trigger word per sentence that's going to jog your memory. And hopefully you've read out loud your response. Read your response out loud as much as possible. And then you'll be able to recollect more and more every time you think of that trigger word. Okay, so one word per sentence. If I was going to memorize anything word for word, it would be my introduction, with the understanding that you need to adapt it to the words of the question, but it's obviously an advantage to have some sophisticated material ready to go. And that's going to set the first impression on the marker. So memorize as well as you can the introduction and your topic sentences, but for the rest of it and overall, you really just want that trigger word or phrase per sentence that's going to jog your memory for the rest of it. And it doesn't matter if you don't remember all the other words exactly, at least you remembered the main point. So you focus on that one word versus the whole sentence. If you are going to memorize anything really closely, it's your introduction and the topic sentences, because they will have the most impact in terms of presenting a sophisticated idea and making that positive impression on the marker. So hopefully that helps. But if you do want to memorize anything for word, read your response out loud and do the whole look, cover, write, check method where you look it down at the response, you read the sentence, you then don't look at it, force yourself to recollect it as much as possible. And then if you can't recite every word back perfectly, this is if you're doing word for word, you would then go back to the point that you got stuck on, talk that out a few times so that it's now locked in, and then do it again. And you don't move on until you can do the full sentence. Very rigorous process. But if you're actually disciplined and you're willing to do it, that will help. But again, if you don't have good memory, focus on remembering keywords, write those keywords down in order, and then practice writing out the essay by remembering that keyword per sentence. What tips do you recommend to improve short answer composition and overall score full marks on that section? Well, first thing is, Melvin, thanks for the question. If you haven't already had a look at my video breakdown of the 2023 HSC paper for section 1, definitely go have a look at that. It's about an hour and a half, and I literally break down every single step of how you would go through that paper. That's if you want to watch a long form video breaking it down live after you've had to go yourself. I'm also going to be releasing a 2024 breakdown soon. I also want to do some essay question breakdowns for those recent papers, so keep a lookout for that. And the other thing is, there's other videos on YouTube and obviously resources on Jeddle, jeddle.com. We've got specific section 1 resources, so video tutorials breaking down different questions, how to answer a 3-marker, 4-marker, etc. Jeddle.com and YouTube have videos on both, so I'd watch those. My main tips would be know a structure really well for each mark allocation. So if you're answering a 3-mark question, already know exactly how you structure that response before you even do anything. So you first of all look at the marks. Marks are the first thing you look at in the question. And you see that it's 3 marks. Okay, you think, I know it's 3 sentences. I know I'm going to do a topic sentence where I break down the keyword in some specific way. I'm then going to provide 2 examples, 2 different techniques, and I'm going to link them to the question. That's the first thing. You just think, I know the structure. I know some sentence starters. It's worth memorizing some sentence starters. You don't want to waste time on the day for section 1 thinking about how do I start the sentence. So memorize sentence starters, memorize structures for each mark allocation that could be asked for section 1. That's the really key thing. Okay, put in the work up front, practice using the same sentence starters, the same sentence structures even. Like, you don't need to be that creative with how you structure your section 1 responses. That's the beauty of it. You just need to kind of tick the boxes. You need to provide solid answers, obviously, but if you do enough, you've done enough. It's not like there's as much of a kind of variance in terms of what's expected. It's just, if you have answered the question and you had enough material, you had enough examples for that mark allocation, you'll get the marks. It's the most formulaic section of the whole exam. So use that to your advantage by knowing in advance exactly how you want to approach each mark allocation. 3 marks, 4 marks, 5 marks, 6, 7 marker. You can treat them basically exactly the same as a mini essay. And then learn lots of techniques and go-to techniques for the different text types. And then practice coming up with links between different examples that you look at. So do lots of practice papers. That's the best way to prepare. Practice papers, look at different questions, and practice coming up with good links between the quote or the visual feature and the keyword in the question. Practice just knowing how to link things. If you can link an example to the keyword in the question, and you do that a lot of times because you've already seen the technique and you know how to structure the response, then you'll basically be getting full marks every time. Okay, so know your sentence structures and how to structure each response for different mark allocations. Practice or memorize different techniques for different text types. So MEST, mishap, there's acronyms that I talk about on the YouTube channel and on Jeddle.com that you can memorize as well, so you can spot techniques really quickly. And number 3, do lots of practice, not just of writing out full responses, but on seeing a technique or seeing an example and knowing how to do a creative link between that example and the keyword of the question. Knowing how to break down that keyword of the question so you actually say one specific thing each time. They're the 3 kind of overall tips. If you want to see how to make those creative links between a quote and an example, there's heaps on the Jeddle.com videos that we have on how to analyze a text, but there's also examples on YouTube as well. Yeah, good tip. Reciting a sentence out loud, then saying it out loud when not looking at it. Yeah, it's the old school tip, right? It still works a treat. I learn essays. If I have to learn an essay off by heart, I will learn it like a speech. So I say it out loud because you're going to be way more efficient saying something out loud than writing it down. Admittedly, you will retain a lot of knowledge on a deeper level or in a better way when you write it down, but it takes 8 to 10 times as long. So I find that you're better off just learning it like a speech, not looking. And then at the very end of, say, each paragraph that you have been able to say out loud, write in that whole paragraph down without looking. So I mix the kind of oral delivery of it. So I say it out loud. And then once I can say a full paragraph, then I write it down to basically cement those words in my memory. Like, the writing down for me is the cement. It like hardens it. But I'm not going to do that for every sentence because it will just take way too long. Okay, so if there are any other questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Otherwise, I'm just going to quickly give you a few really important tips on how to improve the sophistication of your writing. I've got an example here. It's a Module A example on Keats and Campion, so I'm going to bring that up now. And I just want to point out a few things that you can all implement straight away. Just want you to have 2 or 3 takeaways from this live stream right now. So let's pull this up. Here we go. So, brought to you by JeddAI. Remember, if you want expert feedback on your essays, you want to get things marked, sign up to JeddAI on Jeddle.com. Go to Jeddle.com, subscribe to JeddAI, try it out for a month or so, see how you go. You can submit essays, get our team of experts to give you feedback, and you can also use the teacher-trained, rubric-specific AI marking model to get instant feedback and improvements. Okay, so question here that we're going to be breaking down is for Module A for English Advanced. Don't worry if you're not doing that. This is still going to be helpful. I'm going to be pointing out some general essay writing tips. So, Keats and Campion, Question is, everything is being dismantled, reconstructed, recycled. To what end? For what purpose? To what extent is this statement true of the texts you have studied in this module? So this is about a comparative study. This is a study of two texts, which is obviously a comparative study. And that's why it's talking about ideas being dismantled, reconstructed, recycled. If you recycle something, there must be two things involved because something's happening again. So here we're talking about Keats's poetry, and then Campion's film Bright Star. So you've got poetry, and then you get a film that's created in relation to that poetry. So there are our two texts. So to what extent does Campion's the later text, and the poetry of Keats is the source, right? Campion is trying to basically transform our understanding of Keats's poetry. So Jane Campion is going to be the one doing the dismantling, doing the reconstructing, doing the recycling. So the later text is the one doing the dismantling, doing the reconstructing. And that's important for how you frame the argument. You've got to be coming at it from that perspective, that it's the later text, in this case, Campion's film Bright Star, that is trying to dismantle elements of Keats's poetry. Why? Because she is trying to pursue a different agenda. She's trying to change the meaning of his work so as to appease the demands of her context, of a contemporary context that have different values. We need to specify what those values are and why she's trying to give maybe one of the characters a voice that didn't previously have a voice, right? Fanny Braun, one of the important people in Keats's life, might not have had the voice that she deserved in Campion's opinion. So then she gets more of a voice in the film adaptation, right? It's not really a film adaptation, it's like a film response, but it includes a lot of references to the poetry, and it's clearly about Keats's life. Okay, cool. So there's going to be some transformations. Let's have a look at a student's introduction. Here's an introduction that a student wrote in response to this question. And this question is going to be tricky for people. I'm just going to get off that for a second. This question is going to be tricky for people because of the three key terms, if you want to call them all key terms. I mean, they're all seemingly equally important: dismantled, reconstructed, recycled, all of these verbs. The question is, how do we distinguish them? How do we avoid just repeating all of them together? Because you never want to use all of them together. What you need to do is you need to actually come up with a link for dismantling. Like, what's dismantling going to be? Dismantle probably means you're challenging something. You need to quickly brainstorm what that synonym is going to be for you. Okay, when I use the word dismantle, I'm really going to mean that something's being challenged or subverted. If you do this little brainstorming exercise and you have these synonyms, it's going to allow you to be more flexible and more sophisticated with how you use the keywords of the question. So that's the first thing I would do here. So I would say, okay, dismantled for me is going to be like challenged, subverted. Clearly, if you're dismantling it, you're breaking it apart. So it's probably something that you disagree with. It's probably related to a dissonance or a difference, right? Let's do it that way. Okay. So I'm trying to think of all the things that would relate to dismantling that I might have already included in my essay response, especially if I was seeing this in an exam and I had a draft piece. And then I would see reconstructed. Reconstructed is less about challenging, subverting, and dissonances, but it is certainly about transforming something. Okay, so now I'm thinking about transforming, because dismantling is breaking it apart. Reconstructing is now renewing. It's coming up with a different version of it to appease your contextual value, right? So it's for a different context. It's for a different audience. Okay. So whenever in the essay I want to use things to do with transform or Campion's context, then I would use reconstruct. Reconstruct as well, I would also think about form, like how it's being put together. So again, just brainstorming some words that can go with these different key terms so that we're not just using them all in the same way. You don't want to use all of the key terms interchangeably as if they're all the same thing. A question won't give you 3 different key terms like this unless each of them has its own individual importance. And the challenge for you, and this is what markers look out for. This is what markers look out for. who can actually deal with each key term separately and in relation to the other terms? Who can pull it apart? Who can actually expand on each one? And which kids are just going to bundle them all together or treat them as if they're all the same thing? That's going to be the band 3, band 4. Even some band 5 kids will be doing that. Band 6 students are pulling them apart. They don't ever list all of those terms together or even in pairs. They will actually have a specific use for each of those key terms, okay? Now, recycle, if you recycle something, maybe it has resonance. Maybe it's a similar theme, a similar idea, right? So anything that's resonant, anything that's timeless, a universal idea that is common across both texts, well, then we use recycle. What are the similarities between the texts? So just going through that exercise there, I've now got a few related terms that will help guide my use of these 3 key terms that were all bundled together. And that's a really key way of thinking about breaking down a question. It then says to what end, for what purpose. So this is all about purpose, to what end, basically the same thing here. So we can just say purpose. Okay, I need to really focus on purpose. You always focus on purpose. So it's not really adding too much. I would really focus on these terms. And of course, what is everything? What is being dismantled? You can definitely shed some light on that. You don't have to necessarily say everything, just give specific examples of the things. And of course, for any Module A question, you always need to focus on why there are differences. Why have there been changes? And that's always to do with context and authorial intent. What did the author want to do? What was the impact they wanted to have in relation to the audience, especially? Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind for any Module A essay in particular. All right, so let's see the student's introduction here. Texts are significant throughout society and shape the way that we can interpret the past and influence our perception upon primordial views. Yeah, so it doesn't include any of the words of the question there: dismantled, reconstruct, recycled. It's kind of a generic opener. It's fairly generic, like it doesn't really offer too much insight. It does say it influences our perception on primordial views, meaning like from the past or fundamental views even. So that's something we can keep in mind. But otherwise, this is pretty generic. A lot of students like to have this opener, but you've got to make sure that it still has something unique about it. It still has a specific insight that's not just, the module description being repeated. Texts are significant throughout society and shape it. Like, that means this is a separate point. Texts are significant throughout society. That is not something that's going to help you stand out at all. A text being significant, you're not teaching us anything new there. And part of the reason why I think about the sentence being that simplistic here is because you put and here. Whereas you could have said, instead of and, you could have said by. Now you're telling me why they're significant rather than just telling me they are significant and they also do this. So avoid using the word and when you don't have to, because very quickly you can go from saying something quite profound to just saying something quite basic. So you probably did intend to say it this way, but the and actually took away from the quality of the sentence. So you should all go through your essays and look at where you've used the word and think, maybe instead of saying and, I could say by or through and actually talk about a relationship here. Texts are significant throughout society by shaping or through their ability to shape the way that we interpret the past. Texts are significant throughout society. Yeah. I mean, again, overall, it's pretty generic to begin with. I'm just trying to improve it. Through their ability to shape the way that we interpret the past. And then you say end again. See the end? This is the problem with saying end. You start to lose the reader and the marker. We don't know what you're emphasizing. So texts are significant throughout society through their ability to shape the way that we interpret the past. So then you say and influence our perception. I think these are pretty similar. So just keep it to one concrete thing if you're going to say it. I don't think this is adding a whole lot of value, so I would rethink that as a thesis, but it's okay to have a general sentence. I would focus more on the textual conversation aspect. Like, what gives a textual conversation value? Why is a textual conversation valuable? And you might say, well, it can transform our perspective of former texts and the values that shape them, right? So something about it being transformative, for past texts, former texts, and the values that shape them. Okay, so you can say something more generic in that way, but this isn't adding a whole lot. Okay, let's go to the next sentence. Within John Keats's poetry and Jane Campion's film Bright Star, engage doesn't even make sense. You have to have a comma. I think you want to say John Keats's poetry and Jane Campion's film Bright Star engage in a rich. Yeah, make sure this is something that students don't do. They don't read their sentence back in full. It's just like write it down and move on to the next. But if you actually read that out loud, not just in your head, you'll notice that it just didn't flow after the word Bright Star because it said engage. It would have to be a comma or it would have to have a different start. So that's why I've crossed out within. It just didn't make sense. So read your sentences back out loud. That's what the best students do. John Keats's poetry and Jane Campion's film Bright Star engage in a rich exchange of ideas. What do you think I'm going to say to that? What ideas? The best responses will be specific. Give me the overall idea. Okay, then you might say, well, if you keep reading it, we'll give them to me. Let's see if you actually give specific ideas. Reconstructing and recycling. Oh no, we're doubling up. These are just key points for you all to avoid. Avoid doubling up words from the question. Have a look. Reconstructed, recycled. See the orange and green? They are separate key terms. And yet what we're doing here is we're bundling them together as if they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. That's why you need to brainstorm at the start how you can use them differently by coming up with some synonyms or coming up with things in your understanding or response that are going to allow you to focus on them at different points in time. So, green for recycled. Okay, so we don't want to bundle them together and we need to be specific about the ideas. Then you say reconstructing and recycling themes. So you've said ideas and now themes. Again, we're not getting any closer to the mark here. What you then do is say of love, mortality, and artistic legacy, and largely allowing us to connect with these themes. You say themes again here. Okay, we really want to avoid saying the words themes and ideas. What I want you all to focus on is just saying one specific concept without saying the word concept, without saying the word idea. Just say what it is. And let me give you a hint here. That concept is not going to be one word, and it's not going to be a list of words. This is not going to get you anywhere. And I'm just trying to be really blunt about it so you can all avoid it, right? If you list words like love, mortality, artist, you're not telling me any ideas. You're not telling us anything. You're just listing off keywords, and I don't even know that you understand what any of those mean, right? You haven't actually told us a concept. The difference between listing themes and providing a specific concept is that you don't have any list. You actually just say one thing that basically is like a cause and effect relationship. So instead of saying love, mortality, and artistic legacy, you might say it reconstructs our understanding of the power of love to transcend one's mortality, right? I'm just coming up with a random example based on these two words here. Because you might say that someone's love can actually go beyond their death, right? And in a way, that's true here, because if Keats loved someone and that love was explored in his poetry, and then hundreds of years later, that love is reimagined, it's reconstructed in another text, then the love, in a sense, is transcending Keats's death. So that's an idea. Okay, it reconstructs our understanding of the power of love, or we don't even need the power of love. It reconstructs our understanding of love as a transcendent, as a force, as an emotional force that transcends one's mortality, that can transcend one's mortality through their artistic legacy. Look at that. I've used, this is actually a funny example, and good example, hopefully for you, but I've used the three words here that were listed together 3 ideas that mean nothing, and I've shown a relationship between all 3 to say one concept that means something. Okay, I'm going to say that again. I've taken 3 words that are listed together that mean nothing, and because I've actually focused on talking about a relationship between 2 or 3 things, I've now said one thing that actually means something. It's a concept now. This is how we go from a list to a concept. So it reconstructs our understanding of love as an emotional force. See, we're defining love as something. We're not just saying love, mortality. We're saying love is an emotional force. Okay, now tell me something insightful about it. What can it do? What's the cause and effect? It can transcend one's mortality. It can transcend one's mortality through their artistic legacy. In other words, the love that Keats explores in his poetry can go beyond his death because his poetry has such a legacy that it's been recreated hundreds of years later in a film. It does make sense. All the words you said here are relevant. You just didn't actually say any ideas in connection with any of them. And that's the difference. Okay, so that is how you, and I just want to isolate the 3 key words there in yellow. That's how you take a list and make it specific. Now, you don't have to do it with all 3, but I just really wanted to emphasize how you can avoid that listing. You avoid the word "and," you avoid the commas, and you use a word like "as." Love as an emotional force that can transcend. See, that can means you're going to tell me a cause and effect. It can do this. It can lead to this. Okay. Hopefully that is making sense to all of you looking at that. So if you're someone who has listed multiple things, if you're someone who's said ideas and themes multiple times, and again, I'm not meaning to I haven't got any names on this, but I'm not meaning to be super harsh on it. I'm more just wanting you to avoid these classic mistakes. These are mistakes that most students do this. So it's not like this is a horrible response. It's just that it's making the errors that so many students make, and I'm trying to give you very practical insights on how you can avoid it. While Keats's works express a romantic fascination, what's good about what this student's done here is they've actually linked with a specific contextual term, romantic, right? Keats is a romantic poet. That's good, right? Not everyone does that. So that's actually a plus. With beauty and the transient nature of life. Problem being, you've just said fascination with beauty, and you haven't given us that insight. You haven't said a fascination with beauty as something, or fascination with nature as a symbol of beauty or as a vessel of beauty. You haven't actually provided any kind of insight into it. You've just bundled these 2 things together again. So we really want to avoid that end word. But transient nature of life, for sure. Fascination with beauty, for sure. But you just need a little bit more depth on each of those terms, and you need to avoid trying to group terms together and think that it's going to improve your marks. It's not. You're going to improve your marks by talking about less things in more detail. Now, while Keats does that, Campion's film revisits these ideas. Okay, again, I don't love the word ideas, but that's okay. We'll see where you go with it. Through a feminist and modern lens. See, there's always 2 things. Every time we're saying something here, it's always 2. Just use one at a time and focus on that significance, okay? Avoid this doubling up all throughout. Again, most students make this mistake, so I've pulled it up as a really good example of what to try and avoid. Now, let's just say it revisits it through a feminist lens, okay? And again, even if you want to say both of those things, just say a contemporary, feminist lens, right? Just sounds better than having "and," even if you wanted to say both of those. Depicting many ways, again, like the vague language of here, many ways in which these 2 texts align, but also to some extent how key ideas are reconstructed and therefore collide. Like, if you all read this back, there's no way you're going to be able to tell me anything specific that you took away from the idea here. It's just a bundle of words that are all kind of repeated. They reconstruct, they collide. You haven't said what the feminist lens is doing. So all of this is vague, vague, vague. We need a specific concept. Revisits these ideas through a contemporary feminist lens to what? Like, why? to transform or to focalize or to empower the female voice, a female voice, to empower the female voice that was previously suppressed, to empower a female voice that was previously suppressed. Okay, I'm just keeping that short and concise. But see how that purpose is so specific? It's about empowering a female voice. Maybe it's the voice of Fanny Braun, as I said, if we're being specific. But something short and precise like that is going to do a lot better than grouping all of this module rubric language together. It doesn't actually say anything specific. So get specific and say less. Okay? Rather than adapting Keats's poetry, Bright Star echoes its thoughts on passion and impermanence. You all know what I'm going to say to that. Passion and impermanence. Saying more single words does not improve the marks. It actually takes away because it's less sophisticated. Passion and impermanence. You're not actually telling me a specific idea. While also challenging its portrayal. And again, challenging, dismantling. Like, use the words. See how it says challenging in the original here? But when I did the brainstorm up the top from the question, I said, whenever it says dismantled, I'm going to understand that as challenged, subverted, or something that's dissonant, a difference. Okay? And let me just see what I can do here. So now when I see challenging down here, I just put dismantling in instead, because you should always prioritize the words of the question. Use the words of the question at any opportunity. Get rid of any synonyms that you have and instead put the keyword in, as long as you're being specific in your use of it. So have you said what it's dismantling? It's dismantling its portrayal of gender. Okay, you have said something specific about it, so you can use dismantling there. Problem being here that you've again bundled it. You're always saying two things instead of one. Its portrayal of gender and creative expression. Again, I get kind of lost on what's the most important point for you. Dismantling its portrayal. Now, maybe your paragraphs are split up in terms of gender and creative expression, but neither of those is an actual idea. You need to present. You can present the two ideas, but you need to expand on each of them. Portrayal of gender. Maybe you want to say dismantling the limitations of its portrayal of gender, right? Like it's dismantling its portrayal of gender as a limiting social construct. See how I'm using the as a lot? I'm trying to show you a simple way of going from a single buzzword to saying something specific as a concept. So now you're saying that gender is being treated as a limited social construct. And then the creative expression bit needs to be expanded, or you can cut that out in that part and mention it maybe in the next sentence, so that you have in your introduction covered all the key ideas from your body paragraphs. This interaction between the two works demonstrates Campion's fascination with Keats's work. Again, you're not really telling us anything there. All you've told us is that Campion was fascinated with Keats. Well, yeah, she's created this kind of adaptation and responded, so she is, but we get that. Hoping it perpetuates his artistic legacy for future generations. Okay, but like that's too simple. It's not just about perpetuating it. It's actually transforming the way we understand Keats, and it's empowering, again, that feminine perspective. And it's doing other things as well. It's allowing us to tap into the contextual nuances of Keats's work that we might not have otherwise understood. So you need to do a lot more with this. So it's not like get rid of all that. You need to do a lot more. Focus on the transformative element. Impact. That's where you'll get the marks, if you can talk about how it's transformative when you're comparing two texts. While the reconstruction allows ideas from the past to evolve, again, like we barely covered the ideas as it was in its previous form, and take on new significance, sure. Campion's film, to a large extent, if you get a to what extent question, you don't need to say to a large extent or to a small extent. You can say Campion's film significantly does this, or I would be a little bit more subtle than that, to be honest. That's what the best ones do. It's a little bit more subtle, but it's really clear to what extent you agree with the question or the statement. Cambian's film is very much a product of a 21st century context, comma, thus creating her own legacy inspired by Keats. Okay. Yeah, you kind of added this inspired by Keats thing at the end. You really want to say she's created her own legacy while reviving that of Keats or something. Like, just a little bit clunky there at the end. That of Keats. I mean, that's just an example. But try and always, instead of just bundle it, listing things with commas and saying end, actually connect the multiple things that you're trying to say as one thing rather than listing lots of things like I showed you before. So that's the key takeaway. Hopefully that helps. Lots of listing going on there. I've shown you examples of how to avoid that, especially with this example. So you can rewatch that part of the video if you think that's something you do to see what I mean by creating more sophisticated conceptual statements. But that's going to be really key. So I hope that helps you guys. I'll just jump off that one. Questions? What's happened here? Hang on a sec, guys. There we go. Can I use the imaginative text from HSC for my VCE play topic? How similar are they? I can use the text. What do you mean by can you use the text there, Rahan? I mean, for VCE play, obviously you've got your mentor text. So you've got the 4 mentor texts. They're all on Jeddle.com, by the way, unless you're already subscribed. But you've got all of the analysis covered for all of those texts. When you say, can I use them for that play topic? I mean, if some of them are relevant, then you can draw inspiration from them, absolutely. But make sure that the main text that you are drawing influence from are the 4 prescribed texts from the play framework. That would be my advice there. That's going to be a lot more relevant for you. But you can definitely draw inspiration from the HSC imaginative texts and think about, like, the units are very similar in terms of creating your own imaginative piece. Definitely have a look at all of the HSC work and the videos and the content we have, because a lot of the processes are exactly the same. You just have different mentor texts that you specifically need to kind of incorporate or draw inspiration from. So make sure they're the priority, but you can definitely draw inspiration from the HSC text as well. But I wouldn't mention those explicitly in your kind of reflection or any kind of reflective work you do. Just talk about how the mentor text helped you. Yeah, band 6 imaginative essays for play. You're saying, can I use the imaginative text from the HSC for your imaginative essays? I mean, yes, again, as a general imaginative piece, they will be good examples for you to use. So I think the short answer is yes, but let me know if you think I'm not understanding it. I just wouldn't refer in any kind of reflective work that you do, a reflection, to texts that are not your mentor text for the play topic. What's the best way to create a reflective? Should you incorporate quotes? Yeah, in a reflection, you should incorporate some quotes from your own work, ideally, to show examples of how you've used a particular stylistic element and the purpose, most importantly, the purpose for which you've used it. And you should also have some quotes for a couple of different stylistic features from the prescribed text that you're drawing upon. So if you're doing the HSE, have one prescribed text that you're really focused on, know 2 stylistic devices that you yourself have used or experimented with in your own piece, and make sure you have 1 to 2 examples from the prescribed text and from your own text to then discuss in each of the paragraphs. You can have 2 paragraphs for a 10 marker, 12 marker, even an 8 marker, and you can talk about how you are inspired by the prescribed text in terms of using that particular feature, that technique, and then you can show an example of how they used it and why they used it, and how you used it and why you used it, and focus on what impact you were trying to have on the reader. That's what the best reflective responses do. They all focus on, I was trying to humanize my character so that they could connect, or so that the reader could connect with the character's growth or something. It's about engaging the reader in your piece. So make sure when you do a reflection, you're always talking about what was your purpose in relation to the reader? What did you want the reader to feel as a result? How did you want them to connect with your piece? Just quickly here, this is going to be a quicker one. Is there a good template for the reflective piece? Yes, it's on Jeddle.com. You've got all the examples under the framework of ideas. So Rahan, we have all the VCA specific, play framework specific examples, actual full mark examples. And we also have YouTube videos. So check out Jeddle's YouTube, have a look at how to structure a reflection. And there are plenty of videos on there in addition to on Jeddle's website. Prelim reading to write creative topic. Sorry, I said that in a funny way. Prelim reading to write creative topic. 60 minutes writing for an analysis question of a passage from The Great Gatsby. A creative and reflective. Yeah, assume by creative you mean imaginative. How many words split, for example, 12, 8, 10, 10. So, Rafin, is that what's your actual question here? How to approach that? How many words would you split it? Anything that has a 12 and 8 mark split or a 10 and 10 mark split, I'm basically treating the same. That's the first thing. If it's a 12 marker imaginative and an 8 mark reflection, or a 10 mark and 10 mark, I'm treating them essentially exactly the same. You need to time yourself writing out those sections to know how much you can actually write. I can't answer that for you because you might be a fast writer or a slow writer. You need to time yourself out well in advance to figure out how many words you can write in the allocated time. But I would give a little bit more time to the creative side, the composition, and a little bit less time to the reflection. So if you're given 60 minutes and it was 10 and 10 or 12 and 8, I would probably be doing 35 minutes and 25 minutes, or 40 minutes, 20 minutes. No less than 20 minutes on the reflection. But I would probably aim for 20 to 25 minutes on the reflection and allow 30 to 35 minutes on the composition, especially if it's an unseen stimulus. Because you need time to think about that, and the reflection is going to be more structured and you can learn that better and you'll be able to apply a lot more of what you've prepared, whereas you need to adapt a lot more elements for the actual piece if you get an unseen stimulus on the day, or unseen before that day, of course. So 30 to 35 minutes, let's say 35 minutes on the imaginative, 25 minutes on the reflection is how I would probably split those 60 minutes if it was roughly half and half. Because again, the reflection, you'll be able to use a lot of what you've prepared. You just need to mold it and adapt it based on that stimulus and any changes that you made for the composition. But in terms of word count, only you will know how much you can do in 35 minutes. So time yourself, see how many words you can get down in 35, and you'll be able to tell me the answer of how many words you could do. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up in a second. But yeah, Rafin, that's really important. Like, I can't give you word counts because you might not be able to write that many words in the time. And then I would be doing you a disservice by giving you a rough number. So the best students time themselves well in advance of each assessment, and they know exactly how many words they can write in the allocated time. And then what they do is they cut down their draft so they have plenty of time to spare, roughly 20% of the allocated time, to just think and adapt on the day to the question. Okay? All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope that helped. Hopefully, going through that example helped reinforce a few important principles for your essay writing, how you can get up to those top marks. But otherwise, I do really hope that helps. And keep me updated on assessments and how your results are going as well. Always good to hear some results. Rahan with another question here before we go. Throughout the year for all 3 sections, how many practice essays should I make? Well, you should have one core practice essay for each part, and I would be getting feedback on those. But I would be building those drafts and getting feedback from teachers, from friends, from JeddAI at Jeddle.com, speaking to the experts, getting feedback on those different pieces for one core draft for each one, and then doing lots of practice questions. In terms of how many practice questions you should do after learning a core draft really well, I would be doing at least 5 for each of them. If I was preparing for a final exam, at least 5 different questions that I'm practicing. And I'd make sure that the questions are of a different nature. Try and practice with different style questions. Okay, don't do questions that all feel the same. Otherwise, you're not going to be prepared for a different type of question. So yeah, at least 5 for each one. If you're only being assessed on one for a particular term, then just focus on up to 5 practice questions there. But I would only really commit to learning off by heart or familiarizing yourself in depth with one core piece per section. But the more practice you do, the more effectively you'll be able to deal with any type of scenario. All right, guys, that's it for tonight. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope that helps. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Would really appreciate it. Right now, if you're on here, do me a favor, subscribe right now to Jeddle's YouTube channel. It goes a long way, helps us get the videos out to more people. If you have any specific requests, feel free to email us anytime via the Jeddle website. And make sure you subscribe to Jeddle if you need help with your preparation for essays. You want to look at examples, in-depth analysis. Go to Jeddle.com and you can subscribe to JeddAI if you want to get your essays marked by our team of experts, or unlimited feedback on our exam-tailored AI model, so that you're not just getting generic GPT feedback. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining the stream. And I'm starting to slow my words, so that's when I know it is time for me to finish. See you guys soon. See you next week. Trying to be on here every Tuesday from around 7:30 p.m. Touch base here. Let me know how you're going. Enjoy your holidays. I know a lot of you have got a break coming up in the next week or two. So see you soon.